Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We start a new topic in today's lecture and discuss analysis, concepts, and principles. This is basically the requirements analysis concepts, how we can collect requirements from customer and how we can analyze them. This is a new chapter. We had already discussed software process. And we said that software process is actually sequence of steps that are required to develop a quality software. So from this chapter onwards, we'll be discussing those steps that collectively form a software process. So this is the first step. The requirement analysis is the first step within the software process. Let's proceed with the agenda. What are the points that we are going to discuss in this chapter? This is the outline. First, we need to develop an understanding with the term analysis. And then we would discuss its importance, why we need to do this, why is it important, and what are the steps in requirements analysis. And then in detail, we'll be discussing the requirement analysis in detail, how requirements are gathered and how they are analyzed. We have different areas within requirement analysis, or the requirement analysis step has been further divided into 5 different areas. These are the 5 different areas which we will be discussing individually in detail. Then we'll be discussing the requirements elicitation process. What are the techniques through which we can get requirements from the customer? And these are different techniques for requirements elicitation, which we'll be discussing individually. We will be discussing the requirements analysis principles, the basic rules that you need to follow while you are performing a requirement analysis task. And at the end, we'll be formulating a document at the end of requirement analysis, which is known as software requirement specification, or SRS, that is in the form of a proposal that you generally develop at the end of your 4 years degree. So this is the project proposal that we'll be discussing, how it can be developed, designed with the consultation of the customer. But before that, we will need to have a clear understanding of what customer requires. His requirements need to be collected and need to be analyzed in order to know what is to be built, what cannot be built, and what is doable within the requirements being proposed by the customer. It may happen that customers are quite often not even themselves very well aware of what they actually want. So in this step, this is quite a lengthy step, and in this step we are going to refine the requirements, or we are going to dig out the requirements, what are actually handy or required for the problem that is being faced by the customer. So let's proceed with today's discussion. The first point that we start with is to have an understanding with the term analysis or requirement analysis. So we need to introduce the topic first, or the chapter. Software requirements engineering is a process of discovery, refinement, modeling, and specification. The system requirements and the rules allocated to the software are refined in detail in this step. Models of the required data, information, and the control flow within the software, as well as the operational behavior of the software, are created. Different alternative solutions are also analyzed, as software solution may not always be the best solution. As you all know, software solution may not be quite cheap. It is always quite expensive. So generally, solutions other than software solutions are also analyzed, and then a complete analysis model is created. Both the software engineer and customer take an active role in software requirements engineering. So software requirements engineering basically is a collection of or a set of activities which we generally call as analysis. Customer tries to reformulate a quite vague system, the system that is in his mind, but which is not practically yet available, something which is in mind. So quite a vague system, the functions related to that system, the data description of that system, and the behavior which is in his mind related to that particular system in detail. The developer then acts as interrogator, consultant, problem solver, and negotiator, who then keeps constant communication with the customer in order to refine the requirements or to refine the model of the software which is within the mind of the customer. So the developer or the software analyst tries to interrogate the customer in order to dig out what actually customer requires. So what is actually requirements analysis? Here we need to understand specific requirements that must be achieved in order to build a high quality software. As you all know, the main intention of software engineering is to develop high quality software, for which then we follow different process, different methods, and appropriate tools. So that is the job of software requirements analysis, to understand the requirements of the customer in order to give it a high quality solution. To perform this job properly, we need to follow a set of defined analysis concepts and principles. So in order to follow proper guidelines, or in order to develop a high quality software, you need to follow properly or well-defined rules and regulations how to conduct the requirements analysis step. Now, who performs this activity? Generally, the software engineer performs requirements analysis task. However, for the complex applications, a system analyst who is trained within the business aspect of the application domain can also perform this task. Now, what is the importance of this step? Why do we perform requirements analysis? Or what are the benefits that it brings along? If we do not analyze the requirements, it is highly likely that we are going to build a very elegant software solution that may solve the wrong problem. If we are not going to understand the problem, we may end up develop a good software, but it may not be solving the problem faced by the customer. So understanding the problem is important in order to develop right solution for the problem. So in this case, if you do not understand the problem, the result will go waste, and money, efforts, personal frustration, and as a result, customers will also be unhappy. So these will be the results. You will also get frustrated with your own task. Now, what are the steps that are to be performed when we are going to perform requirements analysis step? Data, functional, and behavioral requirements are identified by collecting information from the customer. These are different types of requirements that are collected from your customer. You get the data requirements, the functional requirements, what functions should be performed, what data does it has to operate on, and what sort of behavior your system should show to the external environment. So requirements are refined and analyzed to assess their clarity, completeness, and consistency. A specification incorporating a model of the software is then created and gets validated by both the software engineer and the customer, which we had said the software requirement specification, SRS, which is a sort of a proposal, a written document, which is agreed upon both the software engineer and the customer, in which the detailed explanation of the problem and the required solution and its features are written. Once the SRS or the software requirement specification has been finalized and signed by both the parties, then there is no change within the requirement set. So this is why we perform requirements analysis. It is only to better understand the problem that customer is facing in order to provide him a better solution. Keep in mind, software may not always be the best solution. If there are alternative solutions which are quite handy as compared to software, so generally software engineers analyze different types of solutions other than software as well, which can be more beneficial, more efficient to the customer. Now, what is the end product of this step? An effective representation of the software need to be produced as a consequence of this requirement analysis phase. Like system requirements, software requirements can be represented using either a prototype or a specification document or even some model. So after the end of this phase, this requirement analysis step, the end product out of this phase will be either some prototype, some written document in the shape of a proposal, software requirement specification, which we generally call, or you can have a model, a design sort of on a paper in order to better understand what customer want and what you are going to design or develop. Now we need to have a detailed discussion on the requirements analysis. We have developed our understanding with the term, why we perform, what is the importance of requirements analysis. So let's have some more insight into the topic. Requirement analysis is basically the software engineering task. It mainly bridges the gap between the system level requirements engineering and the software design. So here you can see software requirement analysis bridges the gap between the system level software engineering and the overall software design. The system level software design or the system level software engineering is actually the actual working product, the working software, which we can say. The fully active working software is the end result of system level engineering, while the software design is the design either on computer or the design on paper. So how you would build the design and how you would build the software? Only you are able to do this if you have the software requirements in your hand. So this is the phase which connects two different domains. If you have requirements in hand, you are able to design the software out of those requirements, and on the basis of those designs, then a practical working software is going to be developed. If there are no requirements, no design is developed, no software can be built. So requirements engineering activities result in the specification of software's operational characteristics. So these are the benefits that you generally get out of the requirements analysis. First is analysis activities result in the specification of software's operational characteristics. What are the operational characteristics? How it would operate, for example, what type of data it would take to perform different activities, different functions, the functions that it is going to provide, and the behavior it would respond to some external or internal event. Another benefit that requirement analysis would provide is to indicate the interfaces of the software with other system elements. For example, how your software is going to talk with other different types of hardware, with different types of operating systems, with different types of other software elements. If your software is going to use some other software components, so how they are going to talk to each other. So the requirement analysis is the phase that actually builds a door for communication between your software and different other components within your system. Another benefit that it provides is that it helps in establishing constraints that your software need to meet. Constraints, that means what should be done with the software and what cannot be done by the software. What sort of data should be given to the system, to your software, and what data is not being operated by your software. So these are the constraints that you generally define for a functional software. For example, the RAM requirement, the processor requirements, these are all different constraints that you define for your software. Requirement analysis allows the software engineer, which we also call as the system analyst or normally an analyst, to refine the software allocation and build models of the data, the functional and behavioral domains that will be treated by the software. As I just said, these are the operational characteristics of software. What sort of data that has to be operated by your software, the functions that will be provided by your system, and the behavior or the response it will generate as a response to some internal or external events. So these are three domains which are defined by the analyst if he performs requirement analysis task properly. The data that is to be operated by the software, the functions that are to be provided to the customer, and the behavior your system will show in response to the internal and external events. For example, if wrong input is given, what would be the behavior of the system? How it would stop the customer to enter the wrong input. Requirement analysis provides the software designer with a representation of information, function, and behavior that can be then translated to data, architectural, interface, and component level designs. Once requirements are analyzed, they are then forwarded to the software designer, who then develops different levels of designs out of them. For example, they develop data design, what sort of data should be provided, the architectural design, the layout of the system is developed, the interface design, how different components need to communicate to your system. Interface design is provided, and then the component level designs, how different functions, different components, different units within the software need to be integrated to develop a complete software. The final benefit that you get out of requirement analysis is the software quality. The requirement specification or this requirement analysis task provides the developer and the customer with the means to assess the quality once the software is built. So you have all the written requirements in your hand. So when the end product is ready, when the software is ready, you compare the written points, the written requirements with the built software in order to see if all the requirements have been incorporated in the working software or not, or what is the level of performance of the software in contrast to the requirements being provided by the customer. So at what level those requirements have been provided by the software in shape of the functionality. So this is known as the functionality or the function point, which we were discussing in previous chapter. The level of functionality, the types of functions being provided by the software as per the demand of customer is what you can assess the quality of software on the basis of that. Now we need to discuss the sub-steps or the sub-areas within the requirements analysis phase. Requirement analysis has been divided in different steps further. 5 different areas have been defined, which we are going to discuss in detail one by one. Software requirements analysis phase may be divided into 5 further areas, which are problem recognition, evaluation and synthesis, modeling, specification, and review. These are the 5 different further or sub-steps within requirements analysis phase. Now, what is problem recognition means? This is actually the definition phase. If you remember the software process chapter where we discussed the 3 common areas or the 3 common steps within the software process were the definition, the development, and the support. So the problem recognition is actually the definition phase, the definition step, in which you need to answer all what is actually required by the customer. So you need to answer all what's in order to properly understand and recognize the problem. Initially, the analyst studies the system specification or the current working mechanism of the customer, how he deals with the problem without software, and the software project plan if it has been developed. It is important to understand software in a system context and to review the software scope that was used to generic planning estimates. So you need to first understand how the developed software will be then incorporated into the working atmosphere of the customer. If that is suitable solution to customer problem or some other alternatives can be suggested. Next, the communication for analysis need to be established so that the problem recognition is ensured. So here, constant communication with the customer is required in order to properly understand the problem, in order to understand the working atmosphere of the customer, so that a proper solution, a proper software solution can be then defined. The main goal is recognition of the basic problem elements as perceived by the customer. So the basic areas of problem which are more problematic to the customer are highlighted in this step. So mainly here we try to answer all what's. What is the problem? What is the difficulty level of current working setup? What is the environment that the software will be incorporated? So all what's are answered in order to have properly understanding and recognition of the problem. The next step is then evaluation. Problem evaluation and solution synthesis is the second phase, evaluation and synthesis. So this is the next major area of effort for requirements analysis, or this is the second sub-step of requirement analysis. Here, the analyst need to define all extremely observable data objects, evaluate the flow and content of information, define and elaborate all the software functions, understand software behavior in the context of events that affect the system, establish system interface characteristics, and uncover additional design constraints. So here, in second step, after we have understood the problem, now we have to evaluate the pros and cons of the system that we are going to develop. What sort of data is being generated within the current working environment of customer? That is then evaluated. How we can create data objects out of those information. What could be the possible flow of information? That is then designed. We need to highlight different main and important functions which your software need to provide to the customer. And then we also have to understand the behavior of the software. What should be the response of the system to some external environment or internal environment change? So this is the phase in which we properly understand if either only the software solution can be appropriate or we can have some alternative solutions as well other than software solution. Then the third step is the modeling. Upon evaluating the current problem and desired information has been evaluated, the analyst then begins to synthesize one or more solutions, as I just said. Throughout the evaluation and solution synthesis phase, the analyst's primary focus mainly is on what's, not how's. Keep in mind. So major intention during these first two steps, as the modeling would require the output of these two phases. The basic intention in these two phases is to answer all what's. Then during evaluation and solution synthesis activity, the analyst creates models of the system. So here in third step, now we have to design different models for the system, or you can say different graphs, different blueprints for the system in an effort to have better understanding about the data, the control flow, the functional processing, the operational behavior of your system, and the information content. So you need to design a model. That the model can be in shape of a prototype, the model can be in shape of a diagram on paper, in order to better understand what functions are required, what data are to be processed by different functions, the output of which function will work as input to some other functions. So different activities, the control flow is then highlighted in shape of a model. The model then serves as the foundation for the software design. This model is then used to properly design the software solution. So after modeling, we then write the software requirement specification report, SRS, which is in form of a proposal. So once you design the model, this model will then act as a basis for the creation of specification of the software. So you write down all the details related to the problem on paper, and at the end that specification document is then reviewed by both the software analyst and the customer, and that is then signed. Once the specification requirement report has been signed by both the parties, it is then not altered by any of them. That is all for now. In today's discussion, we started a new chapter, that is software requirement analysis concepts and principles. And we tried to have an understanding with the term analysis. We defined requirements analysis. What is requirements analysis? It is actually the process of understanding the specific requirements that must be achieved in order to build a high quality software. The requirements are placed by the customer, but generally The requirements are quite vague, and the output or the solution or the software which is in the mind of the customer is quite vague. So the task of this phase is actually to refine the requirements, to dig out the structure of the software which is in the mind of customer on paper. So to have a better understanding what actually customer wants. So this is the activity being performed by the software engineer. It is very important phase. Unless and until you do not understand the problem, you are not able to build a proper solution. You may be good in developing softwares, but if you skip the requirements, if you skip to understand what customer wants, your skills of developing high quality software are of no use. So this is a very important step. You need to understand the requirements properly, otherwise your time will go waste, your efforts will go waste, you will get frustrated, and the customer may get unsatisfied, unhappy from your efforts. So within this step, we generally define three different elements. We define the data that is to be operated by your software, the functional requirements, what the functions are to be provided by the software to the customer, and the behavior of the software is defined in this phase. What is the response being generated by your software in response to the external and internal events? For example, if the software or if the operating system is changed, you have developed the software for one type of operating system, and now the working operating system of the client's environment has been changed. So what will be the behavior of your software? Will it be portable on some other platform or not? So these three components are then highlighted within requirements analysis phase. In today's discussion, we discussed 5 different sub areas of software requirement analysis, which are the problem recognition phase, in which we try to answer all words. We try to understand the problem. We try to recognize either it is a problem or not. Generally, customer think of a problem may not be a problem actually. So problem recognition is the first sub-step, and then we evaluate the current working atmosphere of the customer in order to properly understand the problem and synthesize a solution. The solution can be a software solution or some alternative solution can be designed. Then after we have understood that software must be the solution for the customer problem, then we develop a model. The model can be a working paper model. We draw a diagram on paper to define different functions that are to be provided within the software, to define the interconnection of different functions, the data flow, the control flow on paper. After model has been designed, then the specification, requirement specification is then written down in shape of a document, and at the end, the last phase is that software requirement specification or the proposal is then reviewed by both the customer and the developer. So these are the topics that we have discussed in today's discussion. We'll carry on our discussion on software requirements analysis concepts and principles in the coming lecture. That is all for now. I thank you all.